On this episode of Larry the Golf Guy, we talk with Brad Klein, who is a longtime golf architecture commentator and consultant, having spent 30 years as the architectural editor at Golfweek. But we start with Brad's journey in the game, growing up in Long Island, how he was got smitten by the game, what his early experiences were with it, and then trace how he spent a number of years as an academic while also caddying and doing some writing before pivoting full time to golf journalism in the late 1980s. We also get Brad's insights into what he's seeing today in golf architecture, as well as his thoughts on the distance debate. So, all of that and much more with Brad Klein up next on this edition of Larry the Golf Guy. Well, welcome to another edition of Larry the Golf Guy. And I'm so pleased today to welcome to the program Brad Klein, who, of course, is the longtime golf architecture editor at Golfweek, has done so much in the game. Also from and lives in Bloomfield now, which is right next to my hometown of West Hartford, Connecticut. Brad, thank you so much for making the time to join us today.
Yeah, sure. Always a pleasure. It's we're between Players Championship and the Masters, so people are starting to think about golf in lots of different ways now, which is good.
Absolutely, for sure. That's right, for sure. So, just as I often like to do with guests, just to sort of give our listeners some context and go back to kind of how you grew up and got introduced to the game. I knew you grew up in Queens and spent some summers in nearby Rockaway on Long Island. How and when were you first introduced to this great game?
Well, as in with everything else in life, I introduced myself to it. Uh, Frankly, we used to ride in our car on the way from the south. We lived in the southeast corner of Queens, as far southeast as you could possibly get, just above Kennedy Airport. Um, and we would drive this corner, the southwest corner of Nassau County, to get to Rockaway Beach. And I was always fascinated as we made this little turn around, I think Sheridan Boulevard. There'd be this thing I kept looking at. I said, well, that was interesting. And it was a golf course. So one day I got on my bicycle and I was 11, maybe 12, and pedaled the mile and 2 miles and put the bicycle at the gate and walked up. And that was Inwood Country Club. I didn't know it at the time, but that was Inwood. And I fell in love with the game the second I saw a shot launched skyward and land right next to me.
Wow.
And that was, I fell in love with everything about the game at that moment. I just wrote about this in a long piece for the Golfer's Journal
Oh, okay.
because Inwood was the first golf course I ever saw. I started caddying there when I was 14 or 15, and you know that. And the quick story I tell is that I was standing by the right side of what was, I didn't know it at the time. I'd walked across a stone bridge over a little pond, walked down the fairway to the side and watched these two people hit from the tee, and I could see the glint of the shaft and the sun and the ball. And as the ball parachuted down, that was it. I was smitten. So 25 years later or thereabouts, I took our daughter out there. I said, let's go. We were visiting my parents. I said, let's go look
Uh-huh.
at the place I fell in love
Yeah.
with golf. And I walked over the bridge with her. We stood there in the woods. I turned and I said to her, this is exactly the spot I fell in love with
Oh, that's
golf.
so
And then I
cool. I
turned,
love it.
wait a minute. And then I
Yeah.
turn and there's a monument there.
Really?
And there was a big plaque that had just been put a couple of years earlier. It turns out that was exactly the spot that Bobby Jones hit the 2 iron in the playoff with Cruikshank in the 23 U.S. Open to seal his win in the U.S. Open, and that was the spot that I fell in love with golf.
Oh, that's like
And
karma.
after,
Wow.
in the interim, they put the plaque up. When I told Crenshaw that story, he started crying. Um, so, but
I,
he's a total sap. So, but that's a true story.
I
And
love that. That's
I
awesome.
walked there. I walked. It was I walked around the golf course. I took my shoes off and walked on what was the par 3 14th green. And I just thought, oh, this is so cool. That was it. So I started reading about golf courses, and then right after that, Herbert Warren Wind had published a two-part series in Golf Guide Digest. This was in the October and November issues of the 1966 Digest. And it was a series, two-part article called The Architect Makes the Golf Course. And I read that piece and that was it. I just was fascinated by it. So
That
I've
is
been reading ever
awesome.
since. Yeah,
I love it. What a great story. What a great way to be introduced to it. So after you got smitten,
right.
did you start playing? I know you started caddying a little bit at Woodmere, right? Nearby. Is that sort
Well,
of what?
I was very lucky because right in that area, there were a bunch of clubs. There was the Woodmere Club, Lawrence, the Rockaway Hunting Club, which turned out to be my favorite getaway place. I never caddied there, but it was my favorite place to play. And Inwood, and we all had, if you caddied, you could caddy when you were 14. So I started right away, and I had ability to play on Mondays. So after you
Nice.
caddied, so but I started teaching myself. There was a driving range that I
Mm-hmm.
used to go to, and I get on my bicycle and you know will flail away. I never took lessons, and it was a terrible mistake. But I was on my high school golf team.
Mm.
I played number two for Springfield Gardens High School for 2 years, varsity, and we played our matches at city courses. So we played at Casino Park,
Mm-hmm.
Douglaston, and Forest
Mm-hmm.
Park. 9-hole matches, and I was number two on the team for 2 years. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, we flailed away against guys who were much better because they were playing private clubs all the time, and we were playing city courses. But we had a great time. So that's my varsity golf career.
There you go. Okay. I saw before, it's at some point I saw something. Is it true you sold yardage books,
Okay,
handmade yardage books? How did that happen?
yeah. So first of all, I loved caddying. All my friends caddied once, thought it was a terrible burden, gave it up. I loved it. I went back all the time and made a lot of money for, in those days, I'd make 24 bucks a day on a weekend. In 1968, that was more than date money. $6 a bag, no tipping, double bag, 36 holes. So I'd make
Mm.
$48 a weekend.
Wow. Yeah.
And then when I went to college, I went to SUNY State University of New York at Binghamton. They now call it Binghamton University in upstate New York.
Right.
And they had the BC Open. It was a little tour event.
Right. At Endicott, right? Or something.
Endicott,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Enjoy Country Club.
Right.
And in those days, it was a 150,000, maybe a $200,000 event. I started caddying in that in my senior year of college, and I hooked up with I loved it. Here I am caddying on the tour, making 20 bucks a day and 3%. And and I traveled around a little bit early on, and we were hustling caddying pro-ams and shag, you'd pick up at the shag, you'd shag on the driving range with your baseball glove on. And I met a guy named George Lucas who was making yardage books. And he asked, I forget how it happened, but this was the next year, actually. 76, I caddied for the first month, maybe by myself in Binghamton and Flint, Michigan, and Hartford. The
Mm.
next summer, 77, my first year as graduate student in political science, I ran out after classes, got on a bus, went down to Charlotte, and met George Lucas. I don't know how on the range somehow. We started talking, and he asked if one of us asked the other about helping. So the next thing you know, I'm up with George all night with a flashlight measuring golf courses
Oh
with a
my gosh.
250-yard fishing reel. And then we'd
Oh
go to
my
the
gosh.
whatever it was, Kinko's, and we'd draw these plans out and ink them out and staple and sit in the hotel room. And then the next day, I'm standing there on the range, going up and down the range with Trevino, Nicholas, and Weiskopf, and Andy Bean, and whoever else, getting change for a $5 yardage book. So I met
That's
everybody
awesome.
that way. It was great.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, you went to Binghamton. It's funny when I saw that. I think of you and Tony Kornheiser's from your neck of the woods, two notable Binghamton graduates from in the sports world. But
Yeah,
but
he was a year, I think he was a year ahead of me, actually.
yeah, around your time. And anyways, so you go to
Yeah.
Binghamton, but at some point, and maybe it was right after college. When is that when you went to Scotland and traveled and started playing some of the classic courses, I think,
Oh,
if I'm remembering.
you've really done your research here. So I started college in 1971. I was 17 years old, and I had some issues, you could say. Yeah. So I took 5 years to graduate, which
Hmm.
was kind of common. And in the what would have been my senior years, summer of 75, I just decided I'm going to go to Scotland to look at golf courses. So
Hmm.
I took an ad out in the New Republic. This was in March. I took an ad out, personal ad saying, "Avid golfer looking for a partner to go travel, look at Scottish golf courses."
Mm.
I think I invested $20 in a personal ad in the New Republic. I get a call from a guy. I meet him in New York. He turns out to be like some preppy multi-millionaire kid from whoever knows where. And I realized I'm not going to travel with this guy. It's not going to work out. We're in a different world. So I got a backpack and a small golf bag, and I got a rail pass for 3 weeks on Brit Rail, and I flew over, and I went to Dornoch.
Hmm.
I took the train up to Invergordon. This was before the bridge. The bridge was put in 1990, that shortcut of the trip. I had to go way up north to Kyle to Invergordon and then take a bus down. 10 pounds for the day, all the golf you could manage, and my bed and breakfast was 2 pounds 50. So I'm
Wow.
riding the
Wow.
rails. I've got this. Oh, this is what happened. I started. This was the best thing. I flew into Prestwick in those days. Took a flight, a charter flight or whatever, to Prestwick, and then got uh, a train, and I went to Glen. I had arranged to stay the first 3 nights in Glen Eagles,
Okay.
and in those days, this was 1975. Glen Eagles was 37 pounds a night, including breakfast and golf.
Oh, okay.
Um, so I show up at the train station with my backpack and my golf bag, and then they pick me up in their whatever, give me a ride, dump me off at the Glen Eagles Castle, and I was so intimidated by the whole scene. I was 21 years old. I had never had anyone serve me toast like that before in
Yeah.
the little silver tray
Right,
the,
right,
with
right.
the edge with with the crust clipped off. So I couldn't afford anything. I had no money whatsoever. So I ate it was a buffet breakfast. So I ate like a complete pig for breakfast, and then managed to get the maid to bring me like a pitcher of milk and a sandwich or something, and that or I would hike 2 miles into town to a fish and chips, and that was my dinner. So I played golf for a couple of days, eating breakfast like crazy and
It's
as
funny.
cheap as possible. And then I went around. I played Dornoch, I played Carnoustie. This was 75. This was it was a very hot year. That's the year Watson when he
I was
won
to
at
say
Carnoustie.
Watson beat Jack Newton in 75. That was his first British, right?
And
Okay.
he wore a short. He wore shorts. It was so hot. It was such
Oh, wow.
a
Wow.
heat wave and a drought. And I played Carnoustie the week after the Open, and it was sort of you could see the remnants of the tournament there. Anyway, I managed to get on Carnoustie, Dornoch, Turnberry,
Mm.
Troon, a few others maybe. But it was Dornoch that really captured my imagination.
Yeah,
So
I'm not surprised.
then I ditched my clubs and hitchhiked through Europe for a couple of weeks. Got arrested in Amsterdam trying to avoid paying a subway. Um, the whole
The whole
thing you
experience.
do. Yeah. But it was that golf thing in northern Scotland that was just a great experience. Yeah.
I bet. And so I know you're kind of doing a couple of things at the same time. You mentioned you graduated from Binghamton in 76. I know you end up getting a PhD in political science at Amherst, UMass Amherst. And you were on faculty for a while at various places, but at the same time, you're caddying, right? During the summers now, during this period of time on the PGA Tour. So you're this academic, but you're doing caddying for the summers, right? On tour.
So yeah, exactly. I started caddying on the tour in '77 in between grad school. So I would, in some cases, I was a TA for a very prolific professor. So I would take her manuscripts and edit them in the hotel room in between caddying
Oh, wow.
over the summers, and then finished up in let's see, in '81, I went to Germany for a year.
Mm,
Um, got fluent in German, had caddied for Bernhard Langer on the interim. I'd arranged
wow.
through his agent
Okay, that's cool.
because I could caddy in German. I caddied for him in '81 and '82 briefly, a couple of tournaments. Then spent a year in Berlin
Wow.
studying nuclear weapons and arms control. Got my doctorate, and then I only caddied maybe every other summer, a little bit here and there, not much. And then I started teaching in '84. And then in '86, I went out and caddied again in between teaching assignments at St. Lawrence University in upstate New York. I went down to Congressional and the U.S. Open, caddied for Joe Inman a
Mm.
couple of weeks. And then a little bit after that, just intermittently, because I was pretty busy. I was doing a lot of research. I was lecturing all over. I had research grants. I was traveling. Although one of my big things was in 1987, I was all set to give a paper at the Monterey War College on nuclear weapons and
Hmm.
American nuclear strategy, and I landed an assignment with a press pass to cover the Masters. And my then fiance, um, subsequently married, I think this was the reason I married her. She said, "Well, you got to go to the Masters." So I
Yeah.
gave up the academic assignment of giving a war college lecture, which I'd done before and had done since then, and covered the Masters. And
This is
that year,
87, the 87
'87,
Masters? Okay, so this is the
yeah,
Larry
with
Mize chip-in
Larry
Masters.
Mize. And that
Yeah.
year, every year they had a lottery. You submitted your name to
Oh,
see if you
right, to
could play
play
on
on
the
the Monday
Monday.
afterwards, right? Yeah.
And lo and behold, I won. So
Oh,
I got to
wow. So
play
you
the
get to play
Masters.
Augusta National.
Yeah, yeah. So that was the start of writing assignments for a few magazines here and there. I'd already been writing a little bit for Score magazine up in Canada and the USGA Journal.
Journal, yeah.
A very gracious editor at the time, David Earle, who died very young, but he was very encouraging. And I'd written up a number of pieces pertaining to my trips to Scotland because after my initial trip to Scotland in '75, I went back in 1980, um, having caddied on the U.S. tour, having made some friends and met people. I had a letter of introduction from Herbert Warren Wind, the
Oh,
distinguished writer,
that's as good as it gets,
which
yeah.
it opened up a lot of doors. It opened up access to Muirfield, for example.
Yeah.
And I spent an entire month in September of 1980. I spent the entire month caddying at the old course. So I was
Oh, wow, that must have been cool. Yeah.
well, it was great. I had a bed and breakfast for £2.50 or £3 a night. I was making maybe 12 to 15 pounds a day caddying, and I could play the course too. So I played the course probably 20 times, caddied a month. Met people from the R&A, became acquainted with Reed McKenzie, who was then the captain of the
Oh, yeah,
R&A.
right, Captain, right.
Because
Yeah.
I caddied for them I caddied for him at the club matches, and he invited me up to dinner afterwards. And so I'm sitting there with a fairly ratty uh, jacket on, with my only tie and a collared shirt, having uh, drinks with the team from South Africa that I just caddied for that afternoon. So it was quite the kid from the outside walking into the middle of everywhere. I
I
was,
can imagine. I got to ask you, we've had Michael Bamberger on, who I'm sure you know. I mean, and we've talked
yeah,
about
of
Herb
course.
Wind
Yeah,
a little bit. I mean, how did you come across and get to know Herb Wind?
yeah. Very simple story. So I was reading a lot back then. I was 22, 23 years old, I guess, 24, and was reading Mackenzie and Tillinghast and poured through Herb's book, The Story of American Golf. And I'm caddying
Mm-hmm.
at the 79 US Open at Inverness,
Mm-hmm.
caddying for Mike McCullough. And I realized, oh, Herb Wynn's going to be in the press tent. So I wrote him a long letter, handwritten letter, and had the guard, a very famous security guard who traveled with the tour. I think his name was Smiley. I might get that wrong. Big, enormous guy. And I asked him, I wrote in the letter, I said, I love your work. I've been inspired by it ever since 1966 piece in Golf Digest. Just read her the story of American golf. I'd love to meet you. I'm in the press tent and I'm caddying, and if your time allows. So I handed him the letter, and then I don't know. The next day, this gentlemanly English-looking guy
Yeah.
comes to. I guess he met me at the putting green. I wasn't in the press tent. He was. I was in the caddy area. And he kind of just had the letter in his hand, and he comes up to me and he said, and we started talking, and we began a
Nice.
correspondence. And then I would meet him in New York every once in a while. We would meet for drinks, and he was very encouraging of me to f complete my academic career. He he kept saying, there's more honor in academia than in golf writing, and I took that seriously. But he was very gracious and very welcoming and helpful, and also, very much Herb Wind with that sort of standoffish
Yeah.
uh, demeanor. So I decided I was writing occasionally for a Score magazine up in Canada under an editor named Lauren Rubenstein, who was a very fine golf writer. We met while caddying together at the 1980 Canadian Open. He was caddying for Jim Nelford. I was caddying for Bob Byman. We started talking. He published my first 8 or 9 articles. And one of them was going to be this big profile interview with Herb Wind.
Mm.
So I knew Herb was going to be covering the 82 US Open at Pebble Beach. And I
Mm-hmm.
had arranged to caddy for Bernhard Langer. So I went out there absolutely penniless. I was so broke. I had a caddy at the Olympic Club in a 2-day pro-am for hotel money. And then I show up at Pebble Beach and I'm caddying for Bernhard, who was not playing well. He was playing well, he just wasn't putting well. And it was
Yeah,
just a
that's a
separate
common
story.
common theme for him, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll never forget. We were paired with Ben Crenshaw and Bobby Clampett, and in 1982, Clampett was hot stuff, and he was like,
The hottest. I actually, it's funny. I just had Bobby on 2 weeks ago, and we talked about that, and that was actually 81, 82. That's so 82 Pebble, and it's funny with Nicklaus and Watson. He reminded me that he finished third behind them, and of course that was before the blow up at Troon the next month where everything changed. But he was hot stuff for sure.
so I'm paired with Crenshaw. It doesn't get any better than this. I'm paired
Yeah,
with we're
yeah.
we're paired with Crenshaw and Clampett, and Bernhard was putting so badly. He hit the ball great. He get on the green. Outside of 10 feet, he was fine. Inside 10 feet, you had no idea where the ball
Oy,
was going or
oy,
how it
yeah,
got there.
yeah.
And I'll never forget on the 13th green, Langer had a long lag putt, hits it about 4 feet. And I'm standing there on the side of the green with Clampett and Crenshaw, and we turned away because we couldn't bear to
Oh
watch.
boy, yeah.
So the story here is I was had arranged to meet Herb over the weekend. By then, I had already wrangled a press pass, so I was doing joint duty in writing and caddying, and Langer missed the cut by a lot. So I spent the weekend walking around with Herb Wind at Pebble Beach,
Oh
and we
wow.
watched. Well, it gets better. So um, we on Sunday we went out with the leading group, and then we meandered over to Nicholas after he had made 5 birdies in a row on the front nine to
Right.
come close. And then on the 12th tee, from the 12th tee in on Sunday, we followed Watson. and we were standing right in front of
Oh,
the
when
bunker on 17,
yeah.
right there inside the ropes when Watson chipped in.
Wow. Wow, you were
Uh,
there.
I was right there. Oh, I've seen a few other things too. I when Guyberger shot the 59 at in
Memphis.
Memphis
Yeah, Memphis,
at
yeah.
the Memphis Open in June. It was the week before the U.S. Open at Southern Hills. Uh, I managed to finish up a loop and then ran out and watched the last three holes of Guyberger's 59. So that was
Wow.
a real treat too. So I've seen a few things over the
You know,
years.
I'm just curious. I mean, the caddying stuff, you were just able to pick up all these different bags. I always have this image, and maybe it's different today where everyone has their. I mean, now you read like it's like these caddies are married to these players. When there's a split, it like, Golf Digest is saying, oh, so and so is no longer caddying for so and so. It's like, but back then you were just able to sort of, I mean, these are obviously very notable players you caddied for. You were just able to pick these bags up kind of on the come.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, there was no money involved because, just as an example, let's say even the Westchester Classic in 1978 was
That
$250,000
was the
total
biggie.
purse.
Right, right.
Now that's a nine-way tie for 14th place
Yeah, that's true.
for one guy.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
in
that's
order
true.
to make a living back then, we were all hustling. We were four to a room in a hotel.
Mm,
We were jammed up in cars. We were
mm.
hustling the pro-ams, dine and dash, everything, whatever it took to get by. So that's one thing. There was no money involved. And the tour was, those guys weren't making any money either. So they couldn't afford a regular guy. And frankly, the kind of people who made caddying as a career back then, it was, some of them were right out of prison. Some of them had been divorced nine times.
Yeah, yeah.
Some of them were just hustlers. They were nice guys too. There were Neil Oxman, for example, who was a real scholar and a political operative who caddied for a long time. And there were
Mm,
Russ Meyer, I think his name was a lawyer. So you had all sorts of different types of people. You never, and nobody had an entourage. You couldn't afford it. Nowadays, the caddy is part of
team,
they have a
right. Yeah,
psychiatrist, they have a
yeah.
cook, they have a manicurist, a travel agent, all that stuff.
That's true.
And the caddies are making, a couple of 100,000 a year, many of them. So they're not going to give up the bag. Whereas in my day, you got pissed off, you got drunk. I can't tell you how many times I would hustle the parking lot on a Monday or a Tuesday to pick up a bag. And then sometimes even if my guy missed the cut, um, I could pick up a bag on Saturday morning because the caddy never showed up. So that, I mean,
Oh,
that
wow.
happened as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's different world
Different
back
world.
then.
Yeah. So it's much harder now. The player is like an annuity,
Right.
whereas in those days it was just a hustle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. So let
Yeah.
me. So you joined Golfweek in 1988, and of course, that was a home for you for 30 years. You became its architectural editor. I want to talk about that. But how did you pivot? I know it sounds like you were doing some writing, so maybe it wasn't a complete pivot, but you're doing academics, you're caddying, you're doing some writing. How does this pivot to sort of Golfweek happen? How's that opportunity come about for you?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, the whole writing universe was different. Everybody had freelance budgets, and it was common to be able to land assignments if you could pitch. I have a whole file of rejection letters from Golf Magazine and Golf Digest from those days that I keep. But you also could break in. So I started writing for Score magazine up in Canada. I was getting $150 for a 1,000-word article, but it was a little bit of extra money. And then let's see. I had an idea for an article. I, I wrote my first architecture article in 1982. It was a response to the 17th hole at Sawgrass.
Mm,
uh, that when that came out, everybody was talking about design, and I wrote a piece about strategic design,
hmm
comparing that hole to a few others. And then I realized that I really enjoyed that part of the game, and I
hmm
realized that if I was in a press tent looking around, there were 100 people writing about Weisskopf and Watson and Trevino, and the only guy writing about architecture was Ron Whitten.
Right, from golf,
And so
right.
I
Yeah.
thought, first of all, I have this eye and a mind and a memory for the golf holes I've played. I've seen a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
I love talking strategy.
Yeah.
It gave me an access and a level of interaction with the player that most of the other caddies didn't have. So I knew that I had something going there. And I started writing about it, and I just kept hammering away with ideas. So I was writing the occasional piece for the USGA Golf Journal.
Hmm.
And then um, I was enamored with a local golf course up in Massachusetts near me called the Orchards, which was a
Mm.
Donald Ross golf course.
Hmm.
And I was caddying at the 86 um, Greater Hartford Open, the, tr-
Hmm.
the Sammy Davis Greater Hartford,
Yeah,
whatever,
Sammy Davis, right, with
Cannon, yeah,
Cannon,
all that.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I approached, introduced myself to Ben Crenshaw. He had already read a couple of my pieces.
Mm.
I'd written a piece for the Canadian program, and he knew me a little bit. And I went over to him. I said, "Hey, there's this unbelievable." This was in Hartford.
Right.
I said, "There's this really great unheralded Donald Ross course up the road. How about I take you up there for a quiet round, and you'll see a Ross course?" He said, "Great." So I set it up, and he went up there. I drove him up after the pro-am, and he had a great time. He was quiet, very out of the way. He was fascinated by it. He saw a lot of good things. And then I went to Golfweek. I said, "Hey, there's a great story about Crenshaw and this golf course and this effort to restore. How about I write a piece for you?" And Golfweek said, "Try it, sure." So I sent them, it's a long piece, it was 2,500 words. They cut it a
Mm.
little bit, but they put it on their cover
Mm.
in, this would have been 1988. And it won a lot of recognition, and it got a third
Wow.
place writing award.
Oh,
And the
great.
editor of Golfweek at the time, or the publisher, it was Tom Stein, Charlie Stein's son, Tom Stein, came to me. I met him a little later, and he said, "Why don't you write a column for us?" So I thought, great. I was teaching full time. I was teaching at Holy Cross in Massachusetts at the time.
Hmm.
So I started
Hmm.
writing a monthly column for, I think, $75. A 1,500 word column. I didn't care. I had this unbelievable outlet all
Yeah.
of a sudden.
Yeah.
And then, but I have to say, the whole time I was in grad school and then teaching, I got my doctorate in 84, started teaching, taught for 14 years. But all through grad school and from my initial teaching job, I knew I wanted to make the transition.
Okay.
Irwin kept telling me no. My wife kept saying, "You're crazy." And what happened was essentially I was academic here
Yeah.
and doing a little golf writing, and then it went like this.
It went the scale switched, yeah, in terms of
Yeah,
what
now
was more.
partly
Yeah.
because, I never made more than $42,000 teaching um, on a tenure track at Clark University in Massachusetts, where I was making, by the mid 90s, I was doubling that as a freelancer, working for Golfweek, Links Magazine, the USGA, the New York Times occasionally. I had all this stuff going. I thought, I'm going to make this jump. And then finally, Golfweek said, "Sure, come along." So my relationship to Golfweek started with a 1,500 word column at $75 a month. I got a big raise after a year and a half to 125. And by then, people knew me. I had a
Yeah.
voice, I had a
You absolutely
platform,
did.
and I had a love of it. And I did my academic work. I published a major book on U.S. nuclear defense deterrence strategy with um, Cambridge University Press, the best academic press in the world. I had a big
Yeah.
book. I was lecturing. I was at war colleges. I was doing all this stuff, uh, and I really didn't like it. It was not what I loved. The other stuff I loved. So I just kept shifting.
Yeah. And and
And
and yeah.
yeah,
And it worked out great. And so You
Yeah, but I
you
worked at it. I worked really, really
oh
hard
yeah,
at it.
it didn't fall off a tree. I know you worked hard at it, and
And the real turning point in my mind, I knew I wanted to make the transition. I was going to build. I had a 5-year plan. I do everything by 5-year plans. And unlike Stalin, mine work. And the was very careful how I did things, building equity and reputation and building up a pile of. So I was at Clark University in Massachusetts. I just wasn't happy. I was commuting a little bit, uh, and and finally I had already had this major book, academic book, and I had half a dozen articles, and I had a pretty good academic reputation. I was lecturing all over. My work was being translated, and my dean said to me, we expect another book before we come up for tenure.
oh
So I
God.
said, and I thought, all right. So I wrote Rough Meditations. I put together a collection of my golf essays, and I thought that'll show them. And that was my second, that was my next book. It didn't go over well, and I just quit. I left academia before I came up for a tenure decision.
Yeah, yeah,
And I have no idea whether I would have gotten it because I was not a very good teacher. I was a great professor for the good students, and I was completely indifferent, if not dismissive, of the mediocre students. So,
yeah.
and I'm sure that came through. So, yeah. Anyway, the rest is history. I started the ratings program. I started
Yeah, I want
Superintendent
so yeah, I
News.
want to talk about
Yeah,
that because we had Derek Duncan on a few months ago, and of
yeah,
course, who has that role over at Golf Digest, and I remember I was a subscriber for years to Golf Week and read a lot of your stuff, and and know you started the course rating program there. And one thing that always interested me about it is you divided it into classic courses and modern courses, which I don't think any of the other ratings like Golf Digest do it that way. Just kind of curious, kind of what made you do that and kind of how that whole program got started.
yeah. So, two things. First of all, we were an upstart publication. We'd started in Charlie Stein's backyard, and by the time I got to Golf Week in the early 90s, regularly, um, um, we had a circulation of maybe 175,000, whereas Golf Magazine was 1.1 million, Digest was almost 2 million. And we thought, whatever we can do to kind of get in the conversation would help. And at the time, I started talking about this to a number of people, and there was a really avid golfer. This is a great story. Former uh, baseball player with the Washington Senators named Chris Krebs.
Hmm.
He was one of these guys who came up in the major leagues. I think he might have played one game. That was it. Uh, and Then he had to do other things to make a living, but he was very avid, and he actually came up with the suggestion. He says, "Why don't you divide all these other magazines are doing one list of 100?" And he said, we're in the middle of this 90s boom. They're building a golf course a day, all this stuff going on. Why not think about a way to honor the new stuff that's being developed?" And then from that, I formulated the idea of classic and modern. So the inspiration, I have to say, comes from Chris Krebs, and I've always
Hmm.
said this. But then the particular programmatic development of it, the criteria, the distinction, the argument about why 1960 made sense. 1960 was our breakpoint between classic and modern. It had
Mm-hmm.
to do with USGA greens. It had to do with construction, color
Mm-hmm.
TV, Arnold Palmer, all that
Mm-hmm.
modernization and suburban development of the game. But we could make a good case for it. So that gave us now access to 200 courses,
Mm-hmm.
classic and modern. And the beauty of it is that the classic courses, I realized this right away, the classic courses were 95% private,
Yeah.
and the modern courses were 60% public, which meant they could advertise. And so I immediately realized, well, there's a revenue stream for the magazine.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it made sense along so many different dimensions. Editorially, it gave us a lot to write about. From a business standpoint, it gave us a revenue stream. And from a branding perspective, it put us in the conversation as doing something that was not only different, but innovative and ahead of what they were doing, because it stamped those publications as kind of old, stodgy, and fuddy-duddy, if you will. So it worked along so many different dimensions, and it sold itself
Hmm.
in a lot of ways. So that's the short version of what happened. And we started with a panel of about 100. It grew very quickly. We started one event a year where we gathered. I had lectures. People come in. We had everybody who gave lectures. Tom Fazio, Reese Jones, Mike
Oh,
Davis,
wow. Wow.
Mike
Yeah.
Kaiser, superintendents. We had everybody. It was great. And then it really got to be a big travel club business. And I got a little tired of hosting. And I was getting older and I got tired of, 4 days on the road at a resort with people who didn't know how to park their car. And, you sort of spend a lot of time managing the slowest drunk, all that stuff that you
Yeah, yeah,
have
yeah,
when you're,
yeah.
and so, well, I love the editorial part of it. I just simply got tired of, and I thought I could make more money, what's the word? Capitalizing on my reputation at that point, because I had already published a number of books. The Donald Ross book came out.
Right.
So I negotiated my way out very politely on good terms. I just said, I've got to go, and went to the Golf Channel for a couple of years, and then things happened there beyond whatever. And I was uh, just before COVID, I was let go, and I'm on my own, and I've been freelance ever since. So since 2000, I've managed to develop a diversified portfolio that involves journalism, book writing, and consulting. So,
And yeah, and I know you've done a lot of consulting on restoration projects, a lot of restoration of Golden Age courses. I've seen you've been involved in so many things, including ones, I mean, my dad, who's long gone, grew up playing Keeney Park. I have not.
The Hartford Municipal Golf Course. Yeah,
Right, right. And, I remember playing tournaments as a junior at Goodwin Park, another municipal course around there. But, I want to talk to you, get a little more into the architecture stuff. And
yeah,
I mean, Golden Age architecture really seems to be having a moment now. I mean, when I grew up, I'm 65, but when I grew up, we mentioned, I grew up at Ellington Ridge, long golf course. Those were the days. Robert Trent Jones, the long tees, long length Firestone.
right,
Everyone
right.
had on their head because the CBS Golf Classic. When I was
Sure.
shuttered in West Hartford during winters, like you are now with Bluefield, and look at Firestone, all these long, tough holes and everything. And
4 to 5 p.m. on a Saturday
yeah,
afternoon. There was
exactly.
nothing better in January,
Nothing
February,
better.
March.
Right,
CBS
Jack
Golf
Whitaker
Classic.
and
That's
Kenny
right.
Venturi at Firestone,
That's
exactly.
right.
I
Yeah,
remember those days like it was yesterday. But
sure.
but that was sort of my image growing up and playing.
Right.
Those were the golf courses. And now, of course, I mean, I didn't have access to these golden age courses, but these. Although I mean, I will tell you my own little journey. I played in college and got the incredible opportunity. Our home course was the Country Club in Brookline, and I had never been at a place like that, let alone a golf course like that. That was an amazing experience for me. But anyways, just Golden Age architecture really being having a moment. I mean, Gil Hanse, Andrew Green, all these people doing this restoration stuff. Why do you think Golden Age architecture has so come back in such a major way? What is it that causes these courses to have seem so much appeal today?
Well, first of all, it's been a slow process. I don't think it's a moment. I think it's a complete shift in the cultural orientation. After 40 years of the golf industry basically turning its back on the past. So,
Hmm.
what happened shortly was after World War II, a whole new generation of architects came around, and the only one who made the transition from the old to the new was Robert Trent Jones. Everybody else passed away. There weren't, I'm exaggerating slightly, but basically. And Trent Jones was the guy who turned his back on the past at places like Oakland Hills and Scioto and Aronimink, and all these courses, and basically did what he wanted to do and repudiated the past. And that
Mm-hmm.
was now part of a whole approach that embraced earth moving, kind of a builder's mentality, the master constructor who's going to transform the land into their own impression.
Mm-hmm.
And that was tied as well to a shift at the USGA, where their tournament setup under Jodai was essentially to create narrow tree line, very demanding, power-oriented golf courses that emphasized play down the middle. And so a whole new generation of post-war designers came in and uh, turned their back on the past for a lot of different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And it started to shift back a little bit, just slightly. I'll never forget, it was, there are moments, and I've written about this a lot. Um, I give a lot of credit to Ron Whitten and Jeff Cornish for the publication of their book called The Golf Course in 1981, which was the
Mm-hmm.
first book in the post-war era, post-World War II era that venerated the past.
Mm-hmm.
The irony, of course, is that Cornish himself, as an architect, completely butchered everything he ever touched that had anything to do with the old world. But as a scholar and as a gentleman, he valorized all that. So there was a big contradiction there.
Mm.
But that book and the publication of that in 81, a subsequent edition called The Golf Course, or The Architects of Golf in 92, really was a big step. I give the USGA credit for the Open, taking the Open to Shinnecock in 86 and then the
Mm-hmm.
Country Club in 88. And then
Mm-hmm.
people started writing about it. And frankly, I'm going to claim credit
Oh,
for
you
having,
should. Yeah, you're part of this.
I was very proud early on to champion classic design. And I have to say, I was always a little disappointed in Ron Whitten at Digest, who was much more knowledgeable about architects and architecture than I am, but never used his platform in a way that I thought should have been used to make a deliberate case. I was more of that propagandist and an educator, whereas he was, by training, a lawyer, a prosecuting attorney, and he was very good at detailing, but never making a convincing case for a particular kind of golf. Whereas I was really early on making the case for tree removal, for
Mm-hmm.
restoration. And it picked up through conversations and some of the writing of Tom Doak, for example,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
who's early on made the case for classic design. And then you had people like Crenshaw who were getting into the craft, and a lot of people who studied under and worked under Pete Dye who came out as well. Jim Urbina, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and Dope, and Bill Core, all of whom worked for Pete. Pete himself had a very ambiguous relationship to the past.
I was going to ask you about that because how do you, where do you put him on this continuum? I know obviously you worked with him in Wintonbury and you know him well, but I've always wondered because I always put in my mind, and obviously I don't know nearly as much as you do, but Trent Jones on one hand, and then some of the ones you just ticked off on the other side, and where's Pete in this in your mind?
Well, yeah, Pete Dye's a very complicated guy because he was, first of all, he was innovative as a design builder in the field. So he was not big on plans. He was big on building and creating and responding to what he saw. The difference is that what Pete did is he taught a whole generation of architects to allow the design to evolve in the field by building down rather than piling up.
Hmm.
Trent Jones, Dick Wilson, Cornish, Joe Lee, Joe
Jolie,
Finger,
yeah, yeah.
George Cobb, Fazio as well. They built things up and then created all the drainage patterns that they wanted, whereas Dye did what he really was inspired by Seth Rayner. That was his big inspiration. It was
Hmm.
Camargo. The eye opener for Pete was when he went to Camargo
Hmm.
and saw this golf course that was embedded in the ground. And so while Pete himself, his forms are very conical and very abrupt and very lunar and very stark
Yeah,
and very postmodern,
right.
his method of instruction and the lesson that he taught his crew was about building down and simplifying the forms. So he while he himself is his worst own enemy when it comes to restoring his own golf courses. I always think, uh, and it's kind of a unfortunate what he did with Crooked Stick, for example. But if you go to a place that he left kind of untouched, the golf club in New
Oh,
Albany,
New Albany. Yeah,
Columbus,
yeah.
yeah, that's to me a model of what classic Pete Dye was about.
Interesting.
And then
Okay.
what happened also, Pete's early work, or his, the early versions of the Players TPC club, Hilton Head, uh, and obviously Crooked Stick and the golf club. They were fantastically inventive forms after the 91 PGA at Crooked Stick that John Daly dismantled by overpowering. Pete got obsessed with difficulty and length and harshness and severity, and he kind of lost his way, I think, a little bit. But his earlier stuff was just brilliant, and the fact that he brought forth a generation of design builders in the field, they're the ones, for the most part, who have really carried forth the lessons of the classic designers, and
And
that's
what would
why
you say, like what are the, if I were to say, like, what are the key things, lessons of the classic courses? What is it? It's strategy, angles, or what would you sort of using the land, or how would you just describe, if you were saying, if someone asked you, like, what's classic architecture? What are the key elements of it?
lots of different ways to go from tee to green, lots of
Choice,
paths,
so lots of choices.
including on the
Yeah,
ground, and ideally, uh, and I'm talking about once you get past the penal guys who scattered stuff everywhere,
right.
the steeplechase bunkering and the mounds and the
Yeah,
and the the Oakmont kind of hazarding. Uh, if you look at the people like McDonald and Tillinghast and Rayner, you could play the golf course with a putter. You could get around on the ground. You'd score 212, but you'd finish with the same ball you started with. And that's what St. Andrews is about. Play the
yeah,
whole golf course with a putter. So it's ground game access. It's firm and fast, and it's the simplest way I can put it for architecture, classic architecture. It's what happens when the ball hits the ground. Whereas modern architecture, it's about the ball in the air.
yeah. That makes
And
perfect sense.
that shift to me is very liberating and democratizing and makes the game accessible and enjoyable to everybody. So,
Perfect
yeah.
sense. I mean, so do you see, where do you sort of see architecture today? I mean, is that period, which I'd probably say it's not a moment, it was a period of time. I mean, is that still what you see as kind of the popular thing for courses being built today? I mean, or how do you sort of see where we are at this moment in golf architecture?
So, yeah. For one thing, there's not a lot of new stuff being built. It's more retrofitting existing golf courses.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
No matter, even with the growth of the game after COVID and the popularity of it, to give you a contrast, in the 1990s, they were opening up 250 to 400 golf courses a year, new ones. Whereas now we're opening up 30 or 40 a year, maybe in the United States alone.
Yeah, that's a big
But
difference. Yeah.
what you're seeing, yeah, but what you're seeing is much more attention to interesting landforms. Some of them are remote. Some of them might be in central Washington or the Sandhills of
All right.
Nebraska.
Or Mullen, Nebraska, right? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Or some of the sandhills in central South Carolina right now is a big growth area. Texas also. But what you're seeing is, particularly in the retro fitting of existing golf courses, the upgrading and the restoration, you're seeing much more attention to variety, to landforms that reveal the character of the site. I was just at, as an example, Chevy Chase Club in Washington, D.C. It's actually um, Maryland. Andrew Green took an old Allison Colt, Charles Allison course and sort of but filtered it with lots of these homages to classical landforms, whether it's drainage ditches, steeplechase mounds, conic mounding, copses, all sorts of really cool, varied landforms, which was so much more diverse and interesting than the circular greens and circular bunkers that they had had for years. So what I'm seeing is a more of attention to the indigenous landforms that are particular to a site and to a history and a culture of that particular land. And that's something that I think you see with the restoration work of Doak, Tom Doak, Tyler
Hmm.
Ray, with Gil Hands, Corin Crenshaw, certainly. And I
Hmm.
think that's really caught up. That's what's animated resorts like Stream Song, Sand
Hmm.
Valley, Bandon Dunes, Cabot, for example, Rodeo Dunes. Um, what's interesting is that the growth in the game, for the most part, you're seeing two separate kind of trends. One is obviously there's a lot of money out there that a few people have. That's a function of economics and
Yeah.
politics and
Like
decision
the
making.
folks behind Ladera,
Yeah, yeah.
to give you an
Uh,
example, but go
Yeah. So
ahead.
you're seeing a couple of really, really high-end, super
Yeah.
exclusive, very pricey clubs.
Yeah.
Um, and then you're seeing a more of a model of the upscale resort where, you know, to give you a contrast,
Yeah.
golf aspiration in the 50s and the 60s was get a corporate job, join a country club,
Right.
play golf on the weekends, go to dinner on Saturday night. Nowadays, it's like 12 guys put their hats on backwards, get on a private plane, and they fly off and spend 8,000 bucks for a 3-day weekend. And they do that twice a year. And the money that they spent on those two or three outings is what they would have spent on
Right.
an annual
Belong to the
membership at a
club.
private
Right.
club.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the contrasting model that we're seeing. Um, and I don't know how long that's going to last because that's predicated upon a very acute distribution of income at the top.
Yeah.
We'll
That's for
see how long
sure.
that goes. But what I am seeing, I run basically a municipal golf course in my town. I got
Right.
Pete Dye to design a golf
Right.
course from the
Winterberry Hills for
municipality.
people to know. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's 24 years later. We're doing okay. We're making money. It's popular. It's not complicated. There are no forced carries. It's all about the greens and it's all about having fun and walking and playing golf in 4 hours and 15 minutes. And it's a real municipal asset. Same thing with another municipal golf course I was involved with called Keeney Park, which is an old
Yes.
Devereux
Yeah.
Emmett course from the
Yeah. Yeah.
1920s that the
Sure.
city of
Sure.
Hartford revived. It's booming. It's hard to get a tee time at these places. People want to pay $50, $60, $70 to play golf for a few hours. It's I just bought Broadway tickets for our grandson for his birthday. He wanted to see Rocky Horror Picture Show, of course. Balcony seats were $250. Um, a lot of money.
This is a
Whereas
lot
I
of
can
money.
play, and I can play golf locally at a very nice golf course, a municipal golf course for 40, well, 50, $60. So golf is still a value, and I think people enjoy it. And I think that the classic revival of those skills really speak to the way in which most of us actually play golf, as opposed to, a golf course that's long and difficult and demanding and punishes you when you stray into the rough. So we're seeing that kind of opening up of the playing field and more of a ground game access that's tied to developments and maintenance and drainage and irrigation and creating firm, fast playing conditions. All of that is, that's actually, we haven't even gotten into the discussion of maintenance, but the
Yeah.
agronomic sophistication of your average superintendent now is so much more advanced than it was 40, 50 years ago.
Oh, for sure.
That's made the greatest change in how the game is enjoyed.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I see that at our club and our new super for sure. Let me ask you this: Who were we touched on a bunch, went through a bunch of architects and stuff. I mean, what courses, if someone's asked you, Chief Brad, I really want to learn more about architecture, and I mean, there's great books, including a number of yours, the Donald Ross book, especially, that are great to read. But in terms of courses to see, to sort of learn about the game and architecture, I mean, if you were to say these are like 5 or 6 courses you have to sort of experience to really sort of start to learn about architecture. I mean, are you got what would you say those are?
I've thought about this question a lot because, first of all, it comes up and it's a fair question. When I was getting into the game, I could write a letter and talk my way onto Chicago golf and national
Oh,
golf links on a
really?
slow
Wow.
day.
I'm impressed. Those places are so hard now. Forget
Yeah, they are.
it.
So, you know, at one level, what I would tell you people is, uh, first of all, don't be afraid to walk a course. You don't have to play a course in order to really learn it. So my sense is a lot of these clubs would be more open to someone who wrote a letter. First of all, writing a letter itself is an achievement these days, as opposed to, texting the general manager out of nowhere.
Right, 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 right.
It's a great lost art. I
That's
wish I,
true.
I used to handwrite. I still handwrite thank you letters to people and mail them the old-fashioned way, which is a great skill. So that itself is a whole skill. But having said that, what I would suggest you do is there are some great golf courses. Forget about access for a moment.
Yeah.
The U.S. Open is being held at
Hmm.
Shinnecock Hills in Long Island. You won't learn a thing on Thursday and Friday because there are going to be 30,000 people out there with players. But if you walked it on a Monday, you'd learn something.
Mm.
So the first thing is my favorite day to go to the Masters is Monday
Mm.
when you can walk the golf course. So I would pick out a number of golf courses on a quiet day and try to see them. You don't have to play them, but you learn a lot by walking them. And everybody knows which courses those are. That could be, you know, so that's one thing. Um, if you want me to name them, I would, but obviously Shinnecock National, Chicago Golf, um, uh, Riviera. I never forget 1986. I was out in Los Angeles at a conference and I got bored, so I went to Riviera on a Thursday afternoon and I just introduced myself at the pro shop, said, I'd love to walk the golf course. Fine. I met up with a guy, and I can't remember his name now. Turned out he was the coach, the white-haired coach in a TV series of a basketball coach. Um,
Oh, Ken Howard?
it was Ken Howard. I
Yeah.
met him on like the 11th hole, and we just walked and talked for 2 hours.
Oh,
Uh,
cool. Wow.
and I got to see the golf course in the walking with the caddy and Ken Howard. And it was much better than playing the golf course because I would have got my game would have gotten in the way. So I used to do stuff like that all the time. Um, and it was easier then, to be
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And it was easier, to learn Royal Dornoch when it was 10 pounds for the day rather than now, which is 350 pounds and you can't get a tee time
Wow.
for a year.
350 is what it is. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Uh, I pay 700 pounds a year and I just joined. So, I mean, I joined in 1988. So I have access once in a while when I go over there. But, you know, it, so there are all these courses that are worth walking.
Yeah.
Second, there are a number of great golf courses that are worth seeing for the inspiration. I was thinking about Mike Strands, for example, the architect
Yeah. Yeah.
he used to be a shaper for Tom Fazio. He went off
Yeah.
on his own. He died way too young in 19,
Yeah. That can't throat
in
cancer, right?
2005.
Yeah. Yeah.
He had the age of 50 years old. But if you want to see a golf course that'll change your mind, Tobacco Road in
Oh, yeah. North
Sanford,
Carolina.
North
Yeah.
Carolina.
Yeah.
Just go play it. It's probably 85, 100, I don't know, whatever, $125 on a slow day. It's mind-blowing. It's astonishing. So anything by Mike Strands is worth seeing. Lots of golf courses by Tom Doak, for
Yeah.
example, up in Traverse City, High Point, for example, are worth seeing. Or the one in Lubbock, Texas, on a dead flat site to see what he could do. So what I suggest people do is get a list of architects, get a list of famous courses, and see if you can walk them for one
Yeah.
thing.
It's a great idea.
And then call the superintendent and simply say, and then, you have to sort of explain, I know how to get around, I can stay out of the way, I just want to walk. So that's one way. The other thing that I think about occasionally, there are lots of completely unknown golf courses that are so great. So example for Donald Ross.
Yeah.
There's a nine-hole golf course in central Massachusetts called Whitensville.
Mm.
It's just below Worcester. It's a complete gem. The club was too cheap ever to touch it. They never messed with it. It's in perfect 1922, 1923 form. It's sitting right out there in a small town. Go play it, go walk it. Another one like that, Teucica in upstate New York. It's in Rome, New York. It's a Ross course
Mm.
from 1921, 22, untouched, fantastic little golf course. And then in the North Catskills, in the Adirondacks, actually, there's an 18-hole golf course called Tendara, Tendara, or Thendara, Thendara. Front nine by Donald Ross. The back nine, I don't know, might have been done by Daffy Duck. It doesn't matter. The front nine is so amazing.
Wow.
So all these obscure little untouched golf courses that are really cool. I'll give you another one
Yeah.
out in the west coast of Oregon called Astoria Golf and Country Club in Warrenton, Astoria, Warrenton, Warrenton, Oregon. It's about 80 miles northwest of Portland. It's this golf course from the 20s that's built in these kind of corduroy dunes, in the bottom of the corduroy dunes, and all these big sloping contours on the outside. And you just go out there completely mesmerized by these. I played it once in 1995, wrote it up, and I've still been mesmerized by it ever since.
Wow.
In terms of, so those kind of memorable places. There are so many great stretches of holes that you might find fascinating. Might not be a whole golf course, but um, allow yourself to experience the game in different ways. You don't have to play the golf course. Obviously, it helps in some ways, but sometimes it gets in the way. But walking a golf course, one of the things I used to love doing when I caddied on tour, I used to love the opportunity to walk the golf course backwards from the 18th green. It
Mm.
completely revealed the angles and
Yeah.
the landing zones in ways that I would never have imagined. Um, um, and that's another way to really appreciate a golf course. So, um, yeah,
That's great advice.
that's
I
a
love that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's
then there are
yeah.
all these little magical golf courses. One of the ones I was fascinated with as a kid, I caddied at Woodmere, Lawrence, and Inwood, but the one that I found absolutely transformative was the Rockaway Hunting Club.
Mm.
There was a seven-hole stretch on an island. You played across the canal, walked over a bridge, and holes 7 through 14. It's like you're in a different world. You just
Mm.
surrounded by, you might have been, uh, you had no idea what year it was when you were out there. Completely isolated, no homes, just the tidal inlet and the occasional fishing boat and something. Then, of course, the airplanes coming over from Kennedy
Right
Airport.
from Kennedy, right, exactly.
Yeah, lined up, lined up from here to Labrador. Yeah,
Right, right. I
but
love it. Hey, I'll
I
get you
used
out
to
of here on
go.
this. I'll wrap up with just one, and I know it's not a small question, but we'll wrap up with one question because I'd love to get your thoughts on this. This is something I talk about not just with architects on this show, but we've had USGA presidents on. I just had Mark Newell, who was my partner at Latham for 30 years, who was president of the USGA
Yeah,
and wrote the distance report. And that is distance, but from an architectural standpoint, because
yeah.
John Bodenhammer, often talks about, that he had an aha moment when Nick Price was on the executive committee about Nick telling him it's important players value where they win their opens. And so, the notion of
Hmm.
going back to the cathedrals of the game and, the Merions, et cetera. But, we grapple with what's happened with equipment because from
Yeah.
my personal view, I think the Ping lawsuit back in the day with Square Grooves kind of chilled how should I say it? Chilled what the USGA in my view, should have been doing in terms of
Absolutely.
regulating equipment and stuff. And
Yeah.
CAT has been out of the bag for 30 years. But I mean, we are where we are. I mean, to me, the ball rolled back. The ball's one thing. I mean, when you have a 460cc driver, I mean, you and I are old enough to remember the Persimmon Woods and Bellata balls, and when you miss hit one of those puppies, you could snap hook it the way they would spin like nobody's business. And with a 460cc driver, gosh, you have so much more margin for error. Anyways, but from an
Well,
architectural,
just by the way, the
yeah,
driver we grew up with was 185cc, which is
right.
essentially like a five wood. Yeah.
I mean, they don't have it anymore, but the Titleist Performance Center down in Oceanside for many years had this display in the when you walked in there, and they had like every driver head like going back years, and this thing just, as you said, that's what the old head was, and it just grew and grew and grew, and just seeing them all lined up was really stunning to me. Anyways, from a golf architecture standpoint, how do you grapple with that? I mean, you're sitting here wanting to restore these classic courses, but the distances, at least for at the elite level, don't really work anymore. And how do you, I mean, and you're so intimately involved in, consulting on all these restorations. How do you grapple with that?
It's the most important issue, and it's a diff impossible. Just to give you a simple example of how
Yeah,
that has worked. And by the way, I read that distance report and wrote a commentary about it, and thought they did a very good job of analyzing the problem and a very inadequate job of dealing with it. Um,
I think that's very fair.
they got nervous, and I think they have been very worried about potential lawsuits. But as an example, when Donald Ross was designing in the 1920s, his turn points on holes was 200 yards from the tee.
Mm,
Robert Trent Jones revolutionized golf in the early 50s when he was redoing Baltusrol and Oakland Hills and
Oakland
Southern
Hills, yeah.
Hills, 250 yards. Pete Dye was the first one to go to 700 feet, which is 267 yards. Then they went to 800. Then they went to 900 feet, 300 yards. Now the standard turn point is from the back tee is 320 yards.
Mm.
If every bunker at Augusta National is 320 to carry from the back tee. So that's a nightmare because you lose the sense of hitting middle irons. I'll never forget when George Archer won the U.S. Oh, I'm sorry, when he won the Masters in '69.
Hmm.
The hole played 420. He hit 5 iron to the 18th green. Um, Nowadays it's 3 wood wedge for these guys.
And it's a
It's
lot longer holes, but
and
yeah.
they're playing from 4-6. That's right. That's
Right.
right. Uh, when Cameron Young won the TPC the other day on the 18th hole at
Yeah.
Sawgrass, a 460-yard 18th hole, he hit lob wedge. He hit a three-quarter lob wedge.
Yeah, I had 375 off the tee. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the first thing is that I happen to think that the idea that the game, we can't have separate rules for the tour players because that would bifurcate. The game is already bifurcated.
Right. I agree with you. Yeah.
It's effectively bifurcated because most golfers don't play by the rules at all. They're in a different universe. So I happen to think that a tour event ought to be on a golf course that's 8,000 yards with no par fives. Or at least the par fives all had to be 700 yards so that they're actually hitting a meaningful third shot. So a couple of things. First of all, this is an issue that bedevils architects completely.
It got to. Yeah.
I think that for the most part, what you do is you simply say, I don't care about those guys. They're a small infinitesimal percentage of the rounds that are actually played. The guys who are hitting it 300 yards from the back tee at most clubs are industry comps or college kids who can't make it anyway. I think it's a mistake to design the golf course for them without
Hmm.
first designing it for the everyday player who's the bill paying daily fee retail golfer, as
Hmm.
Mike Kaiser would say. It is a massive dilemma, and so we're gonna see this at St. Andrews the next time around. The Open goes there when 6 of the par fours are going to be drivable.
Yeah.
They'll be driving the third, the sixth, the 7th, the 8th, I'm sorry, the 9th, the 10th, the 12th, um, and certainly the 18th. It's so I don't have an easy answer. I would prefer to see a tour ball that simply was a different golf ball and let these guys, play a 500-yard hole where they're hitting a 4 iron or 2 iron into the green rather than a wedge. I think it's a mistake to presume that the game um, can't be bifurcated. Now, I know there are some commercial issues because there's a lot of money to be made in promoting the idea that you can play the same golf ball that Scheffler or
And the same clubs,
uh,
everything, all of it the same. Yeah.
right.
In theory.
So
Yeah.
there is that limitation. Um, but I just think it's a shame what's happened. And it's really the players themselves love to play places like Riviera and Westchester and Chicago Golf and St. Andrews, you know, and it, you can't just leave it up to the wind to make the golf course a meaningful contest because at a certain point the wind gets so strong that they can't even putt anymore because the ball is blowing off the green,
And we've had that at Riv around here. There's been times where they stopped it purely because of the wind.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. The 11th green at St. Andrews. So I do think that it's time for a tournament ball. It's to me, it's a shame to see, it's exciting, I know, to see Rory McIlroy hit a towering 7 iron into the 16th green at Augusta to win. You know, there's something to be said for hitting a 226-yard 7 iron. Of course, the 7 iron that he's using is what we used to call a 5 iron because they've all
Yeah,
been
that's true. The
strengthened. So
lofts are a little different. Yeah,
the
that's
lofts
true.
are very different. But I would like to see a tournament ball. I think it would be great. I also think it's a mistake to have par 72.
Interesting.
When you have a golf course on the tour that's par 72, the whole field is starting 8 under par. They're all
Yeah.
averaging 4.5 on the par fives.
Yeah, that's
So,
fair. You're right. That's fair. But hey, Brad, listen, this has been great. I really appreciate it. It's so fun to listen to you, to hear about all this stuff. And we'll continue to look for your work and best to you. But again, thank you so much for taking the time today.
well, thanks for doing the background research. It doesn't happen very often. And let me know when this is going to appear so I can post it on
I
various social
absolutely
media.
will. I will do it. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.